Blood smells like copper and old pennies, but institutional fear smells like cheap antiseptic and the sweat of someone who has never decided anything that actually mattered. I know both smells. I've known the first one longer. They called me the float nurse, the nobody, the limping liability, the woman who showed up at the start of a shift and disappeared at the end of it like a minor weather event. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Then, 300 United States Marines landed in the parking lot of Briar Ridge Regional Medical Center and started screaming for Ghost. And I had to decide, very quickly, whether I was still the float nurse or whether I was something I'd spent 6 years trying to forget. Now, let me tell you how we got there. My name is Maya Callum. I am 34 years old. I have a limp that gets worse in cold weather and a scar along my left forearm that I wear long sleeves to cover. And I have spent the last 18 months working float shifts at Briar Ridge Regional in Millfield, Ohio. Because float shifts come without attachment and without expectation, and without anyone looking too closely at a resume that has a gap in it that I have never once explained to anyone's satisfaction. I like the anonymity of it. I like being the nurse nobody remembers. You don't take a float position with an ego. You take it with a shovel, and you bury yourself, and you do the work in front of you, and you go home. The ER at Briar Ridge was a fluorescent cathedral of controlled chaos. The lights ran at a frequency that burrowed behind your eyes around hour 6 of a 12-hour shift. The floors were linoleum worn thin enough to see the adhesive beneath it near the trauma bays, and they smelled of institutional bleach and something underneath the bleach that the bleach would never fully erase. To the civilian staff, this place was a war zone on a busy Friday. Loud, unpredictable, exhausting. To me, it was a waiting room. I had worked in rooms where the ceiling was open sky, and the equipment was whatever hadn't been destroyed in the last 30 seconds. And I had made decisions in those rooms that determined who breathed and who bled out in the dirt. A fluorescent waiting room with a stocked crash cart and a charge nurse who wore lavender hand sanitizer that made my throat tighten. This was a vacation. I cataloged the exits when I walked in every morning. Not consciously, just the way you breathe. 2 main ER doors, automatic, 1 staff entrance, keypad, 1 fire exit on the west wall that stuck when the humidity was high. 4 windows in trauma bay 1 that could be broken outward from the inside in under 4 seconds. I knew this because I'd done the math the first day. I had not done the math consciously. My body had done it without asking me. I kept my hands busy. They needed to stay busy, or they'd remember things. My hands had a memory that was separate from the rest of me, more specific, more honest, harder to suppress. I filled out intake paperwork and rechecked IV lines and counted supply inventory with a quiet economy of motion that nobody on this floor seemed to notice and nobody would have been able to explain. "She's fast," I'd heard one resident say once. He'd meant it as a throwaway observation. He wasn't wrong. Dr. Kevin Sterling practically owned the Briar Ridge ER. He was tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably groomed even 14 hours into a trauma day, and he moved through the department with the ownership of a man who had never once in his career been told that he was wrong about anything that mattered. He was competent. I want to be precise about that. He was genuinely competent, the way a person can be competent inside a system that has never once tested the actual limits of their competence. He had gone from a good medical school to a prestigious residency to this hospital, and every step of the way the world had arranged itself to confirm what he already believed about himself. He reeked of expensive cologne, even mid-shift. I clocked it from 8 feet away. Sandalwood and cedar, and something underneath it that smelled like the specific anxiety of a man whose confidence requires an audience. He found me at 7:42 in the morning, 11 minutes into my shift, in Bay 3. "Float," he said. His voice carried across the entire department like he wanted everyone to hear. And everyone, "What are you doing at this patient's line?" "His IV infiltrated," I said. I didn't look. I restarted it. "That patient is not your assignment." He was in pain. Sterling looked at the patient, a man in his 70s who had been wincing for 20 minutes before I'd walked by, and then looked back at me with the flat contempt of someone who has decided that a person's category makes their observations invalid regardless of content. "If I want the opinion of a float nurse on a patient I am managing, I will ask for it," he said. "Which I have never done and do not intend to start. Get out of my bay and stay out of it." He was loud enough that the charge nurse, Patricia, had stopped typing. 3 residents looked over from the corridor. A nursing aide froze near the door. I set the IV tape down on the tray. I looked at the patient. He was watching me with the careful stillness of someone who has learned not to make trouble for people who are trying to help them. And I recognized that stillness because I had seen it before in different rooms. And then I looked at Sterling. "Yes, doctor," I said. I walked out. My jaw had tightened. I made it relax. There was a muscle in my right forearm that had moved, and I pressed it against my side until it stopped. The break room was at the end of the east corridor, and it smelled of used motor oil that had been optimistically labeled as coffee. I poured a cup and didn't drink it, and stood at the window that looked out over the parking structure, and let the particular quiet of the space settle around me. The fluorescent light in the break room flickered. I had been meaning to report it for 6 weeks. I hadn't reported it because reporting things required sustained visibility. I'm not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. That kind of tired had a different address, and I had been carrying it since Helmand Province, and I had gotten reasonably good at not putting it down somewhere people would trip over it. I thought about Helmand more than I allowed myself to admit. Not the whole of it. The whole of it was too large to think about directly, the way you can't look at certain kinds of light head on. I thought about specific moments. The second intercostal space of Corporal Danny Ruiz, found in the dark by Feel Alone, 12 seconds. The specific pitch of the medevac before you could hear the rotors. That vibration that started in your fillings before it reached your ears. The way Sergeant Torres had looked at me when I got the tourniquet on his leg, and the blood stopped, and he was still alive, and he said, "Ghost." The way you say a word when it's the most important word you know. I hadn't been called Ghost in 4 years. I had filed the paperwork. I had taken the honorable discharge. I had thanked people I had genuinely needed to thank. And I had moved, and I had started over, and I had gotten the nursing credentials I'd already half-earned in the field. And I had put on the scrubs, and the ID badge, and the anonymity of the float position, and I had told myself this was enough. This was what I was now. It was a reasonable thing to be. I poured the coffee down the sink and went back to work. Sterling found me again at 10:15. This time he had Patricia with him, which meant the public humiliation had been upgraded to an administrative event. He stood in the main corridor with the patient board behind him, and his arms folded, and his voice arranged at a volume designed to reach the residents and nursing staff who happened to be nearby, all of whom happened to have suddenly found reasons to occupy that corridor. The supply count for Bay 3 was short 14 items this morning, he said. Would you like to explain that? I had done the supply count for Bay 3 at 6:50 this morning. It was not short 14 items. The count was accurate when I completed it, I said. Patricia's count shows a discrepancy. I can pull the log. I don't need a log from a float nurse who has been in this department for 18 months without a single advancement in responsibility. Which I think tells us something. He paused to let that settle. "You are a glorified inventory clerk, Callum. I barely pay you to walk. If we get a real trauma today, I need you to stay out of the way." He turned and walked back toward his bay. I had not moved. I was aware of my hands at my sides. My left hand had made a fist, not tight, but present, and I opened it carefully, finger by finger, and pressed it flat against my. In Bay 4, slightly hidden by a curtain, I could see a man lying in the bed who had been admitted for a knee replacement evaluation, but who was watching this entire exchange with the specific expression of a person who has spent time in rooms where you learn to read authority structures quickly, because getting that reading wrong could get you killed. He was in his late 60s. There was a unit tattoo on his left forearm, partially visible below his hospital gown. He had been getting inadequate attention for most of the morning. His call light had gone on twice and been answered 40 minutes late, and he was watching me the way a person watches someone they have almost recognized. I moved past his bay without stopping. I had a job to do. By noon, something had changed in the air pressure of the building. I felt it before I heard it. I was in the medication room, running an inventory reconciliation that nobody had asked me to do, and the vibration started in the fillings in my back left molar before I consciously registered it as a sound. I stopped. I stood completely still. The medication room had one small window, and through it I could see the flat gray sky over the parking structure, and I watched it for a moment before I understood what I was listening for. That vibration pattern. Not the high whine of the civilian medevac helicopters that came and went from Briar Ridge's roof. This, heavier, the rhythmic thud of rotor systems designed to move mass over long distances quickly and quietly, and with enough redundancy that losing one didn't mean losing the payload. I knew that sound the way I knew the sound of my own heartbeat, and I knew it before anyone else in that building did. I shoved my hands into my pockets. No, not here, not my problem. The civilian staff heard it 30 seconds later. The sound reached down through the building's concrete and into the fluorescent-lit corridor in a way that made the charge nurse look up from her station. "What is that?" I heard her say. I was already walking toward the main ER doors, and I stopped myself, and I pressed my back against the wall near the isolation supply cart, and I stayed there. Through the glass of the ER entrance, I could see the parking lot. And then I could see them, 4 MH-60M Black Hawks. Not landing on the hospital's medevac pad. The medevac pad could not have taken their weight. But coming down in the visitor lot, in a tight tactical formation that cleared the power lines by margins that would have made a civilian pilot's hands shake. They kicked up gravel and paper cups and 2 folding chairs from the outdoor smoking area in a single percussive blast of displaced air. The ER chaos that followed was the specific kind of chaos that happens when a civilian institution encounters something it has no framework for. Nurses scattered. 2 residents ran into each other, and then Sterling emerged from Bay 1 with his surgical mask pulled down around his chin and his face, cycling through authority, confusion, and something underneath both that looked like genuine fear, which was the most honest expression I had ever seen him wear. "Someone call security," he said. "Someone call." The automatic ER doors buckled. They had jammed on the impact of the landing vibration, and 2 Marines in full tactical kit simply drove the butts of their weapons through the glass panels on either side of the frame, reached in, and manually separated the doors. They moved through the entry in a pattern that established a perimeter in 4 seconds, and then the rest of them came through. The man in front was a colonel. I clocked his rank before I consciously registered that I had looked. He was about 50, dark-eyed, economical in his movements, the way people become economical, when they have learned that every motion has a cost and you spend your reserves accordingly. He had the bearing of someone who has been given the hardest assignments available for 25 years and has completed all of them. Sterling stepped forward. "This is a hospital. You cannot." "Shut up," the colonel said. Not loud, just final. "Sterling, shut up." The colonel looked at the room. He looked at Patricia. He looked at the residents. He looked at the security guard who had appeared in the corridor, and then stopped, very wisely, when he registered what he was looking at. He looked at the veterans' ward doors. He looked at the supply cart near the east wall. "Ghost," he said. One. No inflection. Not a question. A statement. As if he already knew she was in this building and was simply waiting for confirmation. The word landed in the room like something with weight to it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody in that ER knew what the word meant. I was the only person who didn't look around to find the source of the name. I was looking at my hands. They were shaking. First time in 4 years. And then I looked at him. He was already looking at me. He had found me by the stillness, the same way you find the one person in a crowd who knows the punchline before the joke is finished. They are the only person not laughing yet. I pushed off the wall. I walked toward him. Not fast. My limp was pronounced today. The cold front that had moved in overnight. And I walked through it without adjusting my pace. My posture was changing in a way I wasn't directing. Something that had been held at an angle for 4 years was being allowed to straighten. I stopped 2 feet from the colonel. "Ma'am," he said. His voice had changed. Not softer, but more specific. The voice of a person speaking to another person of known value. "Where is he?" I said. It was not a question. "Bay 2, one of the Marines said. "Squawk to the chest right side. Tension pneumo, we think." "He's been." I was already moving. I walked past the colonel and past Sterling and past Patricia and past the frozen residents. And then I moved into Bay 2. And then I saw him, Staff Sergeant Elias Mendez. 26 years old. 1 tour in Syria and 1 in Mali, and a face I recognized from a photograph that had been on my wall in the barracks at Twentinine Palms. Someone's son, somebody's whole world. His lips had a blue-gray tint. His trachea had shifted left. His oxygen saturation was reading 78 on the monitor and dropping. Sterling appeared at the bay entrance. "What is she doing?" "Security, get this, move," I said. My voice was not flat anymore. It was sharp and cold and precise as a scalpel, and it carried the weight of 10,000 decisions made in places these people had never been. Sterling opened his mouth. The colonel said 2 words to him. I didn't hear them. I was already at the cart. "I need a 14-gauge angiocath, 6 centimeters, and gloves," I said to the resident who was frozen beside the cart. He handed them to me. His hands were shaking. Mine were not. They had stopped when I picked up the catheter. They remembered what to do. I found the second intercostal space on the right side of Mendez's chest. Mid-clavicular line, the way I had found it in the dark on a mountain in Helmand, on a night when the only light was what a burning vehicle provided. And then I drove the needle in at 90 degrees. And then I felt the specific rush of pressurized air that told me I was right. The tension broke. The trachea began to shift back. Mendez's saturation climbed, 78, 81, 85, and then 89. I held the catheter and counted in my head in the same rhythm that Sergeant Torres had taught me, on a hillside, 8 years ago, which was the same rhythm he'd used to keep himself conscious until the medevac arrived. I was not in this hospital. I was everywhere I had ever done this at once, and it was all the same procedure, and it had always worked. And it was going to work now. I secured the catheter and turned to the resident. Chest tube tray, now. Second liter of saline running. Get the thoracic surgeon on the phone, and I need a pleur evac ready in 3 minutes. He moved. She moved the way people move when the stakes are real, I heard the colonel say, quietly, behind me. Mendez's oxygen saturation hit 92, then 95. His color began to change. I exhaled once, through my nose, and I stood up straight. The room was quiet. It was the specific quiet of a room where something has just been narrowly decided, where the margin between one outcome and another has just been crossed, and everyone present can feel the crossing. Patricia was standing against the far wall with her hand over her mouth. 3 residents were in the bay doorway. Sterling had not moved from the corridor. The colonel stood beside me. He was not looking at Mendez anymore. He was looking at me. "This man's name is Staff Sergeant Elias Mendez," he said. To the room. Not to me specifically, to the room, to whoever was in it. He was assigned to 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, which is the unit that trained its combat medics under a program that ran out of Camp Lejeune between 2015 and 2019. He paused. This program produced 16 combat medical specialists. 14 of them are currently serving. 1 of them is deceased. He looked at me. The 16th was a specialist first class who ran 2 combat tours in Helmand Province and 1 in Kandahar, who carried a citation for saving the lives of 11 personnel under direct fire at Fob Sabit Kedam, who received the Navy Cross. His voice did not change in volume. Her call sign was Ghost. He took 1 step back. 11 Marines, simultaneously and without a word between them, came to attention. The sound of it was the sound of gear shifting, the specific click and rustle of tactical equipment settling into position as 11 bodies moved to the same angle at the same moment. It was a sound I had not heard directed at me in 4 years, and the inside of my chest did something complicated and large that I did not allow to reach my face. I straightened. And then I brought my hand up. I returned the salute. In the doorway, one of the young residents, a woman named Kim, who I had exchanged approximately 6 sentences with in 18 months, had tears running straight down her face without her seeming to notice them. In the corridor, Sterling had no expression that covered what he had just learned. His face had assembled something in the direction of professional composure and failed to get there. He stood very still with his hands at his sides and looked at the linoleum. And I did not look at him, because there was nothing in his direction worth the attention. The colonel spoke to one of his men. "Get Dr. Sterling's supervisor on the phone." He did not look at Sterling when he said it. He had already moved past him the way you move past an obstacle that has been neutralized. I checked Mendez's saturation one more time. 97. "You're going to be fine," I told him. He was conscious now, watching me with the specific clarity of someone who has just come back from somewhere close to the edge and is cataloging the face in front of him with great care. "Ghost," he said. It was the first time I'd heard it from a patient's mouth in 4 years, and it hit differently than I was prepared for. "Not anymore," I said. "Now I'm just the float nurse, but I know how to do this." The thoracic surgeon arrived 7 minutes later and took over, and I stepped back. And I stepped out, and I walked down the east corridor toward the supply room with the flickering light that I'd meant to report for 6 weeks. I opened the top drawer of the supply cart and began reorganizing the gauze in neat, precise stacks. Behind me, somewhere in the ER, I could hear the sound of boots on linoleum, and the sound of voices, and the particular quality of activity that happens when an institution realizes it has been operating with badly incomplete information. The fluorescent light above me flickered once, steadied, flickered again. I kept stacking the gauze, stack by stack. Even rows, corners aligned. I'm not Ghost anymore. I haven't been Ghost for a long time. I'm just the float nurse. Still here. Still whole. If this story stayed with you, if Maya's story hit differently, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We tell the stories of quiet heroes on this channel, people who never asked to be recognized and never needed to be. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels.